guys, so one of the requests I got back in the summer when I did my how to teach English language arts without a curriculum was like, how do you teach your kids to read? So I have, I'm going to explain how I taught my kids to read, and then I'm also going to give some tips for helping struggling readers, because one of my kids like took off with reading and one has taken longer, and like, you know, I think no matter how many kids you have, no two are going to be the same. So I wanted to give some tips for those who find their kids are struggling. But first we'll start with how I taught my kids to read. So I went to university to be a teacher, and I was in the elementary and middle years age range, and they didn't teach us how to teach kids to read. Now, if that is not one of the biggest flaws of the university educational system where I went, I don't know what is. I don't know how teachers actually teach it in a school. I was actually more in the middle grade years when I was teaching, but as a parent, when it came to this, I was like, how do you teach a kid to read? And so we went this route. We used the book Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. Now, I'm going to just start it off by saying, I'm not sure this will work for every kid. And I will say this is really dry, but it did work for both my kids. And it worked differently for both of them. So how this book is laid out, there are 100 lessons, and neither of my kids went all the way through. So it starts out just by like the first, it just does letter sound introduction, and you learn that when you see this, you say the sound when you're at the dot. So that eventually when they get to actual words, then they're saying each sound as they get to the dot and eventually reading it out. One thing I just want to note before we get more into this is there is a written side each day, and we have never done that. For my son, the writing is definitely behind the reading, and that was too overwhelming. And my goal was to teach him to read, not necessarily to teach him to write. To me, those are two separate things. For my daughter, she loved printing, but by the time we were done with a lesson, she was done with it, or she already knew how to write some of these words. So I just completely skipped that portion. So one of the things about this book is like right at the beginning, it tells you in the red, these are the parent words that you read, and it breaks it down. So if you have no idea how to teach your kids to read, this is a good start. It does, as it gets farther along, they start with sentences like read it, and there's a tiny little picture that goes along with it. And it gets longer and longer. Eventually, they're reading like stories. I really appreciate how they teach some blends, like SH here. They're like, that's one sound. It's little things that you know when you know how to read, but you don't think about necessarily when you're going to teach a kid if you've never taught someone before. So when I bought this book, it was $15, and I used it for both my kids, and then they both ended up stopping around somewhere around like lesson 70 to 80 when the stories were about this long. Then I found they were both ready just to read some easy reader books, and we could give up with the dry thing. Now, for my daughter, we pretty much did like, you know, I don't know, like 3 lessons a week until she was at like lesson 80-ish. For my son, we stopped multiple times because he kind of hit a wall where it wasn't clicking anymore, or, you know, like he just like his mind stopped soaking in the information. He needed some time just to let it sit, to stay at that level, and then we came back to it. For him, I did create a sticker chart where each time we finished a lesson, he got a sticker, and then at the end, there was a reward. Obviously, not every parent is going to want to do like rewards that way, but I found that really helped him. It gave him incentive. So this is how I taught my kids to read. By the time my daughter was done this and had started reading some of the easy readers, it wasn't long until she was like in the Magic Tree House chapter books, and it snowballed from there. She was good to go. We read a couple chapter books together where we sat down and she read them aloud, and I just sat there and helped her with words she didn't know. It was easy. With my son, it's been a longer process, and so I thought I would share some tips for anyone that is having kids who are struggling to read. My friend Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia, actually I just saw posted a video on this same topic about kids who struggle with reading. So I'm going to leave her video linked below, and I would love it if you would go check out her channel and check out that video. So the biggest thing is be a reader yourself. Have books out, let them see you reading, and because kids always want to copy parents. I think this one is fairly obvious. There is a meme that I love so much that I'll put up here. And that meme just makes me chuckle all the time. Because if you want your kids to do something, often modeling it is the very first step. And also to read to them. And no matter what their age, if they are 10 years old and still struggling with reading, read to them. We do a lot of audiobooks in our house because my kids love to listen to chapter books. And I struggle with reading aloud. Like, I have said this so many times over in my newsletters and on my blog. I wish I was a great read aloud person. You would think I would be because I read so much, but my problem was I read so much in my head as a kid that as an adult I struggle with reading aloud. So I read lots of picture books to my kids, even though they are 7 and 10. We still read a bunch of picture books, and then we also just listen to a lot of audiobooks together. So it's like a family time, and they also like once again see me enjoying books. One big thing I struggled with at the beginning was something that's actually very helpful, and that is to let my kids read whatever they want. When my daughter was bringing home like Fancy Nancy, there was a few books where I was just like, oh, it's too painful for me to read, but if you want to read it on your own, go ahead. If this is what you are interested in, if this is what your level is right now, go right ahead. But I might not read it to you, but I was okay with just whatever like floats their boat for that. I got a very poor piece of advice from someone, and I don't remember where this was, when I was teaching my kids to read. Actually, when I was teaching my daughter. And so I learned from my mistake. But this person said, like, you were always supposed to, like, just make them sound out all the words. And it kind of sounds good in theory, but really, if a kid is reading a story, I find it is so much better if you tell them the word that they're struggling with, because then the story flows. If they're in the middle of a great story, they're in the middle of a paragraph, and they're totally stumped on this one word, and they have to sit and think about, like, try to sound it out, they've lost the flow of the story, and they lose their interest in the story. So as soon as they were reading to me, or they're reading stories and they're struggling with a word, I just help them by saying what it is. So I've mentioned audiobooks already, and audiobooks have been huge in our family. So we listen to audiobooks together when we're eating meals. We listen to audiobooks in the vehicle. We, even each of my kids, we got them tablets so that they could each listen to their own audiobooks. This has been really big for my son because he has a pretty niche interest. I mean, he does like a variety of different books, but he loves like funny, silly stories, and he loves to listen to them over and over and over and over again, like the same 5 chapter books. And so with him having audiobooks, he can just keep going, listening to his own audiobook over and over again, and that has increased his vocabulary so much. He still is not like loving reading, but he has such a good vocabulary because of all the books that he's been able to listen to. Okay, and the very last tip I have is something we did recently, and this has skyrocketed his ability to read. I can't believe I haven't done this sooner. We turned on the subtitles on our TV. So anytime they're watching anything, all the words are on the bottom. It does take a bit to get used to if you've never done this before, but my son, like a lot of kids, loves his screen time, loves to be able to watch something. I'm not the hugest fan because often, especially watching something, it can just be like a zone out time. But we have had the subtitles on for a month maybe, and I have seen his reading just skyrocket because now he's like reading some of them out loud as the show is going, and I'm like, whoa, I had no idea you could read those words or that well or that quickly. You know, it is just the simplest little thing. So they still get to watch something, but their minds are working in a completely different way because they're also reading at the same time. This has been just a game changer in his reading ability. Okay, so that's a brief little rundown on how we teach our kids to read, some ideas on struggling readers. I'm going to leave some links below. I'm going to leave this book linked below, and I have another book here I just got out this book from the library called The Book Whisperer. I have not read it yet, but I have a friend who is a really big reader who has raved about this book. She's also a homeschooler. It's about awakening the inner reader in every child, and her sons love to read, and she said this was amazing. So it's all about, yeah, just turning your kid into a reader. I don't know, even though my kids love books, I'm still really excited to read this one on my own. So I will leave a couple book links below for you to check out if you're interested in any of these. I would love it if you have any tips for struggling readers. Leave them below if they're any different, so that if people are watching this video and they need more ideas for their kids, they can check out the comments. And let me know, how have you taught your kids to read? I'm curious about it. I went with this because one of the homeschoolers that I was following at the time, this is what she did with her kids, so that's just what I did. Plus, like, the $15 price point made it pretty easy. But I know there's so many different resources out there, so if there's something that really worked for your kids, I would love to hear it. Okay, thanks for watching, guys. I have a really fun video planned for next week. Hopefully everything works out and I can have that video out, but I'm really excited about it. So thanks for being here.